Alrighty, good afternoon. Welcome to NycosRPG. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master Soapbox. We are going to be covering 10 topics they'll talk about tomorrow because there is so much going on in the games community right now that's putting a veneer of commonness to many of the games that are out there. And I think what we're going to see is some major changes in the next few years about role playing games. And I want to address it here early enough that you, as a viewer, can start to consider these topics even before the talking heads of the games business, so to speak, dig their teeth into it. I tend to find the topics that I cover are approached at a more circumspect pace. Perhaps it's because I have less to lose. Perhaps they are working with the concept of the algorithmic trends and they're trying to stay ahead of the crest and yet be on it, whereas I tend to shoot right through the waves, so to speak, here at the beginning. So as we go through these, I hope we'll find exactly what you're looking for. These are 10 topics they'll be talking about tomorrow.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so as a game master with 50 years at the table, so to speak, I have seen the rise and fall of quite a few companies in 50 years. I've seen the style of roleplay change, and I've watched the rise and expansion and increase in complexity of every other form of game as well. Tabletop RPGs being perhaps the least of them, the least malleable, because the storytellers sort of are like a collective moderation. Those of us that have been GMing week over week and month over month and year over year tend to hold to our own personal traditions and don't necessarily move as swiftly as the tides, so to speak. But trading card games are particularly virulent in this way. They tend to adjust and adapt over time. So we're going to be looking at 10 particular topics that fit into this theme. And I am very interested in finding out what you feel about it. I want to express these in such a way that you can interact with them. So I will be stating the situation, talk a little bit about my personal views on the subjects, and moving on to the next one, simply because there's a lot to cover here. Let's get going. Alrighty, so I haven't figured out my cameras yet. That's that. So that one, okay. I get them all confused. So we're going to be talking in this segment. We're going to talk about the fact that the OSR mechanisms that are becoming popular today are reaches for and desires for the simplicity of the older games, the brutality, perhaps the raw nature of them, and the semi-permanence of the characters that the players bring to the game. The legacy characters, the long-form RPGs of the past, have slowly dwindled, partially because the game masters sort of gate-kept and held their players in thrall, so to speak, for long enough that the new players that are coming on are wanting that same visceral crunch that was originally in the properties. And as the larger, more legacy RPGs became more and more long-tail, dramatic stories, there wasn't as much room for the new guy, so to speak. And so the OSRs are very dynamic right now, but I think we're going to see that even as sessions go on month after month, year after year, we're going to see a change again as these OSR mechanisms also start to age themselves. The players begin to understand the gravity of the characters that they have, and while they do still start with that gritty visceral feel. As they advance, then the complexity of the games will start to catch up, and we'll see those environments themselves becoming more sophisticated and becoming richer in lore, and the depth of even the OSR mechanisms will start to slow the advancing of the characters within them, and the players will desire this as well. I do believe this is we're already seeing some of this, if you will, within the processes for DCC or other properties becoming more sophisticated, richer, deeper, more levels. They recently re-released the world's largest dungeon, and this reboot or refit, while it does enrich the environment, it also at the same time tries to hold on to the newness, and this too will age over time as those players become more loyal to the properties. The next thing we're going to see is an expansion, and I believe this will be pretty geometric as the players in the AI games, the players in roleplay games, start to lend themselves to game masters having fewer players at their tables simply because the GMs are becoming out of favor. There are going to be more and more AIs that become NPCs, and even eventually, I believe at some point, characters in people's RPG sessions. And the stories or the theories of the dead internet will start to trickle into people's tabletops to the point where they will turn to AIs as initially non-player characters in their games. Game masters will be able to lean on them because many of the AIs are now interacting with voice recognition so that you can have a conversation with them, and having conversation with an NPC would be far more interesting to a player perhaps than dealing with a game master, because it will be a novelty. And the sophistication of the AIs, as it increases, as the vocal range, the dynamics of artificial intelligence come to the fore, then the game masters will be able to lean more heavily into the NPCs they've created by turning those tasks over to an artificial intelligence for the holding of that persona session after session. Next, I think that matter of fact, I've had this conversation with several different people over the last couple of months. The idea of a GM-free environment is going to increase simply because players are demanding a less contrived, less guided story than perhaps previous generations of role players. Those of us that are long-term veteran storytellers will have our audiences, that's for certain, but the number of new players that come into RPGs are going to be either dissatisfied or uncomfortable with the mechanism of someone guiding or directing or GMing the story for them. And so there's going to be a increase in properties that will be made available from manufacturers that will be fundamentally designed to be GM free. Now, I will have to specify that this GM free mechanism will also include those RPG mechanisms that are heading towards AI driven games mastery. And I know that sounds heretical, but the idea that a artificial intelligence could administer the rules is certainly an absolute truism. And arguably, a properly programmed artificial intelligence in the role of game master would therefore automatically not get involved in those issues that are uncomfortable to a player or group of players, and so they would be able to be more hands-free and pursue their personal RP desires in game sessions without the director arguably either making judgment calls or deciding things that are uncomfortable for particular players. Now, I also think that this means that we're going to be expanding. I've seen this in the board games business. As a matter of fact, there are a great number of board games companies that are building into their properties the concept of solo play because they are finding there is a dwindling audience that can embrace those larger, more crunchy games simply because the learning curve is so steep on them that the individual player may be finding difficulty in getting others to that want to play the game with them, and so they want to explore the game, and so therefore the rules have to be more open to solo interaction. As the challenge with game master quantity versus player quantity continues to be a difficulty to overcome because as many new games are coming out, there are therefore fewer and fewer game masters that can specialize in each of them. So they'll also have to be developing a solo play mechanism in order to remain a saleable product. The irony is that the vanity audience that is RPG players, that is to say, those that play because they want to experience the game, will stay high. There will always be those players who want a group game, but the concept, therefore, of a GM free or game master free game, as well as a opportunity to play with fewer individual players, will expand solo play. And the rise of automated, if you will, NPCs will therefore exacerbate this further. I think we're going to see new releases in the next couple of years that will be games specifically designed for solo play, which at least at its face seems almost oppositional to the very concept of tabletop games. If you were building a tabletop property, you want it to be people that are playing, but as we have more tight scheduling going forward, less direct opportunities to build in large game time blocks, the expanding of a solo play process just seems like a logical step in the process. And I've even noted that in many of the properties that are out there, there is now included in them random generators and such, so that even in a sophisticated role play game, there is the opportunity to automate the mechanism so that a person who bought the product can actually play it and let the game fundamentally act as the director. Now, I also think this is going to mean that we're going to see an increasing rise in lit RPG. For those of you who don't know what lit RPG is, it's fundamentally the narrative concept that you are reading a story or you are part of a story as a character who is aware of your role as a character in the story, and therefore you're going to be seeing an expansion in this further as there are fewer and fewer individual games that are playable because there are fewer and fewer storytellers. Now, I'm probably going to get some feedback from you on that, and I greatly appreciate that. I'd love to hear that there's an overall broader expansion in GMing, but I don't think that that is going to be the case. As a matter of fact, I see the concept of self-aware lit RPGs rising because it is at least a comfortable shoe-in, if you will, for those who have been viewers and observers. As they step into the roles, it's going to be easier for them to cross that barrier and become part of a lit RPG environment rather than only and solely being part of a collective roleplay game. I do think that us old guard or original generation GMs, we are going to become things of the past. The artifact that is the ancient relic is going to be the storyteller at the table. That in certain cases is going to be a positive thing. I mean, I'm already in the quote grandfather stage. I've got grandkids and all of that, so I'm already into that ancient relic terminology. As a matter of fact, majority of role players out there would probably already consider me to be a relic, but the process is going to limit out us old guard game masters, because we are coming from a previous iteration's psychology. We're coming into the world with the idea of how storytelling works that is not acceptable to the newer audiences. We are going to become things of the past simply because we're going to be quaint and perhaps aged out. That's precisely why I ended up writing the NycosRPG system, is to maintain relevancy, because I wanted a mechanism that would be easy to teach and quick to play. So if you haven't yet, check out our information in the description so that you can find out about our property and how that would work for you and your games group. Now, do I think RPGs will ever be completely replaced? I think that the video game market really did a number on the very concept of role-play games. Many games that are out there that are considered to be online RPGs are really themselves going to become relics, because the personas that are being played are, by their very nature, metagame tools. You are playing a character in a story, and therefore you are endeavoring to engage in learning the lore and all of that, but there's not any true interaction between you and the mechanic of the game. And now, as I've said before, as the artificial intelligences become more conversant, as they become more streamlined, I think you will see the concept of RPG in the classic sense completely replaced with a new mechanism, because the elements of the story will fall out of the hands of the director-based environment and replaced with online role-play opportunities, and that will therefore obviate the need for old relics like myself. I also believe that this is going to, because of the lack of understanding of what role-playing is, or a desire to move away from the uncomfortable nature of player versus player interaction, I do believe there's going to be an increase in God's Eye games. And by that, I would compare to the Chronicles of Amber series of RPGs, wherein you are not playing an individual any longer, but you're playing a deity, if you will, a god level actionable persona, and therefore you're adjusting the outcome of the game at that level. We've already seen this in the advancing of role-play games to Paragon level games, where the characters are, if you're looking at classic Dungeons and Dragons, that are moving from, say, the 12th to the 20th level, and even beyond that, the idea that a persona can persist and become fundamentally deity is going to be increased. Now, there's going to be a pushback, I believe, against this in the non-game world, but that will be lessened and reduced over time, because there are less people who would find it a challenge, or even in certain cases a form of heresy to even consider the idea. But I think there will be a rise in games that let the player take the role of deity and make decisions on that much larger scale moving forward. Now, in the rise of the viewership, the number of people that are intaking role-playing environment materials through the online environments like YouTube will be increasing. There's just going to be a larger and larger number of people who only understand role-play from the vicarious standpoint. Our culture has moved away from tabletop games and is moving towards more social interaction at a meta environment level. You see this in tabletop RPGs. You see this also more specifically in trading card games and even board games, where the conversation is not about the play of the game, but rather the mechanics that went into designing what would be considered enjoyable or fun in that game, and therefore you're now playing the game above that level, so you are fundamentally part of an audience rather than players, because the individual players have to look at it from a very different standpoint. I think that this advancement of an audience over players is part of the reason why there is a perception that the tabletop games business is exploding, because there are more people that are actually buying into the idea of playing a game, but they aren't actually buying the game to play it. I know that seems like a bit of a nuance, but I do believe that the increase in visual intake is increasing the number of purchases made in those areas. Now, I can say that specifically because although my property's been available online for about 6 months, I haven't seen radical sales, simply because the world of Nikos, the concept of that which I speak, is not a recognized brand. And as people do take the explorational step of playing or purchasing the NycosRPG to play it, will be a weather change, but I don't anticipate that will happen anytime soon, because there is an increase in the number of people that want content basically diced up and spoon fed, because it's easier to consume when it comes in small bursts that fashion, unlike the long term or long tail games that require weeks and weeks and months to play. Finally, I have also seen a radical increase in the number of people that play idle play games. In other words, they push their pieces into movement and they don't have to worry about the actual physical demands of classic tabletop or classic computer games, and therefore the characters just advance. As a matter of fact, I saw a very early version of this, God, what it must have been about 15 years ago, wherein you put in the name of the character and you put in the race of the character, and then periodically, I think it was like 2 or 3 minutes later, your character would be involved in an encounter, and the software would tell you you've just entered a catacomb, and in that catacomb you've met a ghost, and you defeat the ghost and you achieve so much treasure. And then another minute and a half would go by, and it would say you've moved from the catacombs into the tombs, and in the tombs you found a wraith, and you defeated the wraith, and you get so much treasure. And another minute later, and so on, and so on, and so on. And these idle play games give the players the opportunity to claim those victories and build those artificial memories into their world, so that they feel the experience of role play without actually ever having done it. And I think this contrived play mechanism is going to also be tied into the very concepts we talked about in one of my last videos when we talked about ant farms, and the idea of a storyteller who builds his story and then gets out of the way and lets the story run and the players advance will become more common. A game master therefore won't have to do the work of finding a games group, because he can turn to 1, 2, or 3 AI driven characters that he then puts into the roles of NPCs, and then lets the system mechanize. And then the game master will also have this artificially generated experience of being a storyteller, because he will be given feedback on how the players interacted. I know this is rather avant-garde, and I probably will get in a little bit of trouble on this one, but I do feel that this is really one of the directions that the games environment is going to be moving into in the future, and I'd love to hear your feedback on whether you think I'm anywhere near close. So, do you think that a game master is an antiquity? Do you think that the advancing age of many of the game masters is going to play a part in how quickly or how slowly they cease to function? Do you see AI as even being a possible interactive surrogate, both as a player and as a director? I'd love to hear your comments. If there's some of these ideas that you want to talk about, please feel free to leave the comments below. And I do record 5 nights a week, so we'll be back with another episode soon. I hope to see you then, and in all cases, I always want you to know that I'd love for you to be at my table. Let's play.